Here's the key. Digital tools are not the enemy of authenticity. They're the new amphora. They preserve and amplify the message if we use them with intent. So, when you're prepping your next tasting sheet, podcast, or team training, ask yourself, what's the human truth behind this wine? What value does this bottle express? And how can I tell that story in a way that fits this new era? Short, visual, and meaningful. Because if we get that right, we don't just sell wine, we begin shaping culture.
Welcome to a special series on the Italian Wine Podcast. In this series, Italian wine ambassador Ryan Robinson reads and reflects on the art of wine storytelling, the latest book by renowned scholar Professor Attilio Scienza. From the myths of ancient Greece to the language of modern wine communication, the book explores how storytelling shapes our understanding of wine, and why these stories matter more now than ever. Let's begin the journey.
Hello, and welcome back to the Art of Wine Storytelling. I'm Ryan Robinson, the Director of Education at Brescome-Barton and proud member of the USA Wine Tasting Team. Each week, I'll reveal something else about myself as we continue through this journey, as we guide through Professor Attilio Scienza's The Art of Wine Storytelling. I'll be your guide through this incredible journey where science, myth, and culture swirl together like a perfectly aged Barolo. Today, we'll be exploring how wine's story changes with the society that consumes it, how the meaning of wine and the way we talk about it isn't fixed in a glass, but evolves with politics, media, marketing, and nowadays, even memes. Today, we're going to explore chapters 7 through 9 as we dig into wine's shifting role in society. We're going to look at the rise of a new narrative era and how storytelling has transitioned from Homer's Odyssey to hashtags. As someone who teaches, sells, and lives wine every day in today's media-saturated world, these chapters really hit hard. They ask us not just what wine we're drinking, but why we care, why we share it, and who gets to tell the story. So let's dive right into it. Wine and society, an evolving relationship. Market research reveals that among Italians who drink wines regularly, about 60% of the total population, only 2% consider themselves experts, while 20% feel they have an acceptable level of knowledge. A trend has also emerged which sees wine paired with food in increasingly unconventional ways. The ideal wine, particularly for younger consumers and those from new markets, appears to diverge significantly from the current offerings shaped by producers and tradition. Women tend to prefer spiced, aromatic, and floral wines, showing more openness to novelty, including ethnic cuisines, leaving tannic and structured wines to men. However, men increasingly lean toward lighter, less alcoholic wines. A progressive disconnect emerges between the experiences and imaginations of consumers and the rigid thinking of producers. This highlights the need for a revision in how wine is communicated today. Historically rooted in Mediterranean culture, wine's evolution reflects societal changes. For centuries, low-quality wine was a staple dietary component for the poorest social classes. Until the 1960s and 70s, wine was predominantly homemade, purchased in bulk and locally sourced. With today's Italian society's break from its agrarian roots, wine consumption mirrored other luxury products. The masses began emulating the habits of privileged classes, claiming cultural ownership, establishing cliches, and most importantly, engaging in conversation about wine. The habit of drinking alcoholic beverages does not happen spontaneously, but it is shaped by family and social group behaviors. Young people today rarely drink wine at home and tend to frequent social spaces where wine plays a limited role. Where, then, will they learn the sensory vocabulary crucial to understanding wine. For younger generations, wine suffers from significant voids on a symbolic level, despite efforts to address these through various educational initiatives. Wine culture has become a bookish, top-down, media-driven subject led by experts who are often not sufficiently persuasive to convince consumers. The world of wine is steeped in symbols, some of which we consciously recognize, while others remain deeply rooted in our psyche. The myths tied to wine bear witness to our rituals. For a ritual to be effective, participants must share the same wine myth, aligning behaviors within a community. When wine transcends group habits and metaphorically enters the global stage, its symbolic language loses its mythological meaning, shifting towards new ritual expressions and forms of communication. For example, are we sure that the language we use to communicate wine to Western peoples, and which is based on expressions of myth inherited from the Greek world, is also effective for the peoples of the Far East, who have developed their culture, myths, and symbols so different from ours? What relationship exists between a supposed universality of myth and tradition? The answer lies in the origin of symbolic language, which does not belong to a universal knowledge that can be easily shared by all civilizations, but which is instead the expression of regional knowledge, conveyed by that mythological arbitrariness, where anthropologists call arbitrariness the divinity that represents the original, the beginning of history, and what preserves the sense of a history if not tradition. But the risk is that the ritual becomes a ceremonial formality, that in its reiteration is void of content if it is not constantly integrated with those elements of ritual augmentation that consist of the technical scientific insights inherent in the processes of formation of sensory profiles, geological origin of the soil, characteristics of the climate and grape variety, etc., or in the stages of wine production. Research and knowledge to grow the culture of wine and attention to the raw material also form a holistic perspective of biodiversity, the conservation of century-old traditions, the anthropological and sociological aspects of wine production. A new narrative era. Since the late 20th century, brand storytelling in the United States and Europe has been transformed through media, industry mechanisms, and globalized capitalism, becoming a powerful tool for reshaping consumer and citizen opinions. Storytelling, once reserved for children, through cartoons and grandmotherly tales, evolved into the narrative turn, a new narrative era, giving rise to narratology. Marketing techniques have shifted from product-centric approaches to logo-centric strategies, and eventually to stories. A brand's success now lies in the narrative that communicates it. The crisis of brands is caused by the elusive, unpredictable, paradoxical behavior of consumers, who are no longer as fascinated by the brand. Brands have started speaking, and when they do, consumers listen carefully. What's in a name? Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. In 1996, Pakistani children hunched over soccer balls with the word Nike went around the world. Inside the brand, there were stories of misery and hunger. The brand Levi Strauss, for example, became synonymous with the working-class hero archetype, selling jeans by telling the stories of miners. This narrative universe, or dream society, fosters shared visions and connects people globally. Consumption thus becomes a planetary communication of symbols, mirroring the Catholic Church concept of communication among saints. By consuming mythological symbols, we internalize the most potent myth of all, heroes. Storytelling is the science that translates and promotes things, real or imaginary, into words, images, sounds, and real perceptions, and for this reason makes them true, legitimized to exist. It is an approach common to many sciences, from anthropology to genetics, from neuroscience to geology. It becomes a managerial discipline, an indispensable tool to be listened to and chosen. Pop culture is obsessed with storytelling. The Men's Fashion Week that takes place in January each year in Milan, and then especially in Paris in June, is a riot of storytelling. The richer in pathos, the more effective the narrative. Fashion shows have now reached new heights of theatricalization. Clothes are only one of the elements, sometimes not even the main one, of complex staging and that stimulates the senses. In general, in the new storytelling, it is the urban environment with its critical issues that prevails. What matters these days is only the image. Understanding the aesthetic value and the design path of the collections requires an awareness of the representation in front of you. Clothes must be seen as masks, as costumes, not as simple items of clothing. The latent danger of a disconnect between what is seen on the catwalk and the actual reality of the cell has finally materialized. Fiction prevails, because the clothes on the catwalks are only to lure to social networks. In the store, you will find something else. This dichotomy has always existed. Catwalks and newspapers require high-impact gimmicks. Clothes to wear, on the other hand, must also serve a practical purpose. Has this dichotomy also arrived to the world of wine? From the Odyssey to digital storytelling. The growing distrust of classic advertising, the so-called brand communication, is a consequence of the advent of the internet, which has triggered a profound change, together with social media, represented by digital storytelling. This change is characterized by the transition from a so-called asymmetrical communication implemented by brands through massive investments, which repeated messages in traditional media, to narrative sharing in which the story suggested by the brand is integrated and reinvented by the public, through the creation of space for dialogue, where they can express themselves freely and share experiences. Blogs can perform this function well. Such content, which is intended to communicate an idea, is represented by blog posts, podcasts, photos, videos, comments on YouTube. The story that takes shape travels on the web and is enriched with unexpected details, developing interactive stories with a multitude of users. Digital storytelling uses digital tools to build multimedia stories with strong emotional impact. Digital stories harness their expressive potential in the use of images, films, music, people's stories. It is mainly used in teaching, training, learning, to share brand values, for marketing, or as a communication tool within companies. The case studies are numerous, even if there is a lack of trainers and storytelling experts, largely due to an inadequate culture in audiovisual and multimedia languages. By means of digital technology and YouTube, anyone who owns a camera and has a story to tell can find their audience. The phenomenon of online video sharing is destined to represent a communication channel of increasing importance in the future. Blogs are an example of storytelling that can help overcome barriers of impersonal corporate communication and interact with the various stakeholders, internal and external, in more direct and innovative ways. The use for narrative context is the best tool to capture the attention of viewers who are increasingly distracted by infinite digital connections. But is such an approach really new? The success of Homer's Odyssey is largely linked to his ability to narrate the facts according to a plot that served the Euboean navigators for the conquest of the West. In fact, it can rightly be considered a travel manual used to exercise the fears of the crews of ships headed towards the unknown. The places of the archaeological finds of the Euboean skypoi, a type of drinking cup used in ancient Greece, coincide not by chance with the places frequented by Ulysses. Our perception of history of the ancient Greek sailors struggles to distinguish truth from falsehood, reality from fiction. The superiority of Greek literature consists precisely in its relationship with reality, with space, with the idea of frontier and conquest, through the references to places of history and the myth of the Mediterranean. For a long time, the Mediterranean coast represented more than a destination celebrated by stories, a narrative horizon, towards which peoples of the Near East headed, a place where anything is possible and which offered everyone the opportunity to start a new life. At the same time, it was both nation and narration. Now, as we summarize these 3 chapters, let's take a look at Chapter 7. Chapter 7 explores the way wine mirrors the societies around it. In the ancient world, wine was both sacred and strategic. It was used in rituals, diplomacy, and even social status. Now we fast forward to the present, and wine becomes a cultural marker. It's now more of a symbol of sustainability, status, and it could be even a symbol of rebellion. Let's think about natural wine. It's not just about sulfur or filtration, it's about values. A reflection of society's shifting views on transparency, health, and authenticity. In many ways, a cloudy pet nat from Abruzzo today speaks more about the consumer than the terroir. When we look at Chapter 8 calls this the new narrative era, a time when wine is no longer communicated through static labels and back vintage Parker scores, but through fluid, digital, and inclusive stories. Influencers, sommeliers, and yes, even AI-generated tasting notes, which there are a plethora of these nowadays, all of these are part of the new language of wine. The consumer no longer is as passive. The consumer is part of the story. They co-create the story. As someone working in education and sales, currently in 2025, this resonates deeply. So for me, in Connecticut alone, I see buyers choosing wine, not just on taste, but on purpose. Oftentimes I get asked, is this winery woman-owned? Is this carbon neutral? Does it have a story I can tell on Instagram or during a tasting dinner? Something that's very new within this industry is Gen Z are becoming buyers. And so buyers are no longer referencing Parker scores. They're referencing a short reel that they saw on Instagram or Facebook. The narrative about how wine is presented to the buyer certainly is changing, and that is very prevalent today. Nowadays, story has become the currency of wine. When we look at Chapter 9, from Odyssey to digital storytelling, this lays out the full arc, from oral epics that were passed down at firelight to more curated TikTok tastings and vineyards that are using drone footage. The medium of wine communication definitely has evolved, but the need for narrative has never been stronger than it is today. Even as digital tools multiply, the emotional core remains the same. Just like Homer's audience leaned in to hear about Odysseus' journey, your audience today, whether it's a WSET Level 3 student, a skeptical buyer, or a curious consumer, they want a story that they can fill. Here's the key. Digital tools are not the enemy of authenticity. They're the new amphora. They preserve and amplify the message if we use them with intent. So, when you're prepping your next tasting sheet, podcast, or team training, ask yourself, what's the human truth behind this wine? What value does this bottle express? And how can I tell that story in a way that fits this new era? Short, visual, and meaningful. Because if we get that right, we don't just sell wine, we begin shaping culture. As episode 3 wraps up from the art of wine storytelling, today we followed wine through the ages. From sacred rituals to retail shelves, from the Odyssey to organic hashtags. The takeaway? Well, the takeaway is that wine evolves with us. The more conscious, connected, and creative we become, the more vibrant its story becomes. As always, massive thanks to Professor Attilio Scienza, whose work makes this journey possible. And to you for being part of a growing community of wine storytellers. In our next episode, we will dive into 3 new chapters that examine biodiversity, betrayal, and the vine's uncertain future in a changing world. Until then, keep drinking with intention, keep selling with soul, and most importantly, keep telling the good stories. I'm Ryan Robinson, and this is The Art of Wine Storytelling.
You've been listening to The Art of Wine Storytelling by Professor Attilio Scienza, read and commented by Ryan Robinson. The book is available now on our site, Mama Jumbo Shrimp, and Amazon. Follow the Italian Wine Podcast on all the major platforms so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to rate and review us.